Good morning and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for our discussion of Repair Priorities 2014, Transportation Spending Strategies to Save Taxpayer Dollars and Improve Roads. I'm your host for today, Craig Chester, Press Manager here at Smart Growth America. I'd just like to remind everyone we encourage your participation in today's program. You can follow along on Twitter using the hashtag #RepairPriorities. Feel free to ask questions and we'll take a look at them as they come in. And also type your questions into the webinar screen. At the end of today's call, we're going to have a Q&A where we select some of the questions from our participants to pose to our panelists. Later, we're going to hear from representatives from several state departments of transportation, including Richard Tétrault of the Vermont Agency of Transportation, Polly Kent of the Michigan Department of Transportation, and Steve Allen of the Tennessee Department of Transportation. To give us some overview and some context for this call, I'd like to introduce Roger Millar of Smart Growth America and Steve Ellis of Taxpayers for Common Sense. Roger, to start things off, I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you, Craig, and good morning, everyone. I'm Roger Millar, Vice President of Smart Growth America. Our organization, Smart Growth America, is the only national organization dedicated to researching, advocating for, and leading coalitions to bring smart growth practices to more communities nationwide. We're all here today to talk about how states are investing in road repair. I'm sure many of you are seeing potholes. Perhaps many of you are dodging potholes left over from this year's snowstorms. And I'm sure you'll see more as we thaw out and things start to soften up. You may have even had to fix a flat or have your wheels realigned because of a pothole. So from a motorist's perspective, an American family's perspective, you certainly understand why investing in road repair is important. Investing in road repair is also important for the financial health of state departments of transportation. Our new report, Repair Priorities, is looking at which states are investing in repair and which states are putting their finances at risk by spending on expansion when their roads are not in a state of good repair. Smart Growth America helps cities and states grow in ways that are fiscally responsible and economically sound. Maintaining roads in a state of good repair is one way to do that. So to talk a little bit more about why investing in repair is so important, I'm going to turn it over to our co-authors on this report, Taxpayers for Common Sense. Steve?
Thank you, Roger. I am Steve Ellis, Vice President of Taxpayers for Common Sense, a national, nonpartisan budget watchdog. We've been working on transportation and road issues since our inception nearly 20 years ago because the federal treasury is one of the major investors in road projects across this nation. And it's not all about stopping waste. It's also about getting the nation's spending priorities straight and investing wisely in the country's infrastructure. The nation continues to face a very challenging budget environment. The national debt is more than $17 trillion, and annual budget deficits are roughly $500 billion. In a constrained budget environment, prioritizing investments is critical. And in the era of budget caps set by the Budget Control Act of 2011 and the recent budget deal, every dollar spent on a wasteful or unnecessary project is a dollar that is not available to be spent on a critical need. Investing in road maintenance over new construction makes good fiscal sense now and in the future. Everyone knows the old saw, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Well, that holds true in budgeting and in the issues of roads and repair. A few cracks and potholes may not sound like the makings of an impending budget crisis, but it is a situation of pay me for repair now or pay me that much more in the future. Repair costs rise exponentially when roads are not routinely maintained. According to the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, every dollar spent on keeping a road in good condition avoids spending $6 to $14 later to rebuild the same road after significant deterioration. Even worse is if that dollar is spent on new construction and expansion instead. Stealing from road repair Peter to pay for new road construction Paul is inefficient and drives up future liabilities. That's because if you think about it, every dollar spent on new construction and expansion increases the future repair needs in the country. Every new lane mile is another lane mile that will have to be repaired. Doing this, states will be adding to a system they are already failing to adequately maintain. They are setting themselves up to fail. But it's not enough to talk about this in isolation as an esoteric fact. So in this report, we looked at which states are budgeting wisely and investing in repair and which states are increasing their and the nation's future liabilities by concentrating on expansion. I want to be clear. At Taxpayers for Common Sense, we're not calling for spending more. We're calling for spending more wisely. Tens of billions of dollars are being spent each year on roads. We need to make that money count for states, for drivers, and for taxpayers. Thanks, and thanks to Smart Growth America for their hard work on this report. At this point, I'd like to turn it back over to Roger to go over what we found. Roger?
Great. Thanks, Steve. States as a whole are spending more on expansion than on repair and preservation. That's our major finding. Little has changed since the release of our first Repair Priorities report back in 2011. Between 2009 and 2011, which is the last year that data is available for all the states in a manner that we can compare all of the states, states collectively spent $20.4 billion each year on road expansion. For all that money, the inventory of lane miles of state highway grew by a net of 8,822 lane miles of new road, which is less than 1% of the total roads in this country. So over that 3-year period from 2009 to 2011, we spent $60 billion to add capacity to our road system. During that time, the number of miles each of us drives on average actually went down, and congestion conditions really didn't change. So was that $60 billion a good investment? That's a good question. The remaining 99% of our roads, over 1.8 million lane miles, we already are maintained and repaired on a budget of just $16.5 billion, which is $5 billion a year less than states spent on expansion. Now, these decisions were made at a time when roads across the country were actually deteriorating. Back in 2008, 41% of America's roads were in good condition, but by 2011, that number had fallen to just 37%. Back in 2008, 17% of our roads were in poor condition, but that number rose to 21% by 2011. And as all of you know, those of us that are part of the motoring public, roads in poor condition cost motorists money. The American Society of Civil Engineers, in their report card for America's infrastructure, estimates that road repairs related to car repairs, related to poor road conditions cost motorists over $67 billion annually. Now, as road conditions deteriorate, the price for repair goes up. As Steve said before, according to the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, or AASHTO, every dollar spent to keep a road in good condition now avoids having to spend $6 to $14 later to rebuild that same road once it deteriorates. So underfunding repair and delaying repair projects, it's inefficient, and it drives up future financial liabilities. Now, we've looked at what it would take to bring all of our roads to a state of good repair, to bring all of our roads that are in fair condition and in poor condition to a state of good repair. That's about 395,000 miles of road in poor condition and 785,000 miles of road in fair condition. Bringing them up to good and then keeping all of it in good condition would cost us about $45 billion a year, more than 3 times the current amount we're spending on repair and preservation. Now, if states had spent the $20.4 billion that they spent on expansion, if they'd spent that on repair, for a total of about $37 billion a year, we could have eliminated half of our backlog of roads in poor condition by 2011, and we'd be well on our way to eliminating all those roads that are in poor condition today. We'd still have to deal with the roads in fair condition, and we'd still have to pay for those maintenance projects to keep the roads that are in good condition in good condition. So we could have been on target to do that. So as you can see, nationally, we still have a long way to go. And our report includes several recommendations for things state and national leaders can do to encourage investment and repair. You can read all of them at www.smartgrowthamerica.org/repair-priorities. The good news is that there are states out there that have made changes to their spending strategies. They're doing the right thing. They've shifted their priorities towards repair and preservation. They're using asset management best practices. And depending on the states, there are states like Tennessee that have maintained their roads in a state of good repair. Their roads are in great shape. And they're making decisions about expansion based on cost-benefit analysis, being very strategic about what they do when they do add capacity. We're going to hear from some states that are leaders in this area, and to facilitate that discussion, I'm going to turn it back over to Craig.
Thanks a lot for that overview, Roger. As you mentioned, our report highlights several states that prove to be national leaders in investing in repair, And today we're lucky to have representatives from several state DOTs with us to talk about their approaches to prioritizing repair, including Vermont, Michigan, and Tennessee DOTs. So we're going to begin with the Vermont Agency on Transportation, which dedicated 77% of its available capital funding to road repair. And joining us is Rich Tatro, Director of Program Development for the Vermont Agency of Transportation. So a question for Rich. So as I mentioned, Vermont invested 77% of available funds in road repair and preservation between 2009 and 2011, and just 23% of those available funds in road expansion. Why did Vermont choose to invest this way?
Yeah, thanks, and thank you all for joining us. Let me preface it by, all states aren't created equally, nor were we all created at the same time. Certainly as far as creation, we all have different environmental and geological substrates to deal with, as well as Vermont's been at it for 400 years now. So my friends on the line from Michigan, their infrastructure might be just a little bit more new than ours, and their challenges is just a little bit different. But here in Vermont, like I said, we've been at it for 100 years, hundreds of years. More recently, we've had the interstate come in and wrap up around the 1980s. In the 1990s, policy-wise, we started to realize we couldn't build interstate-type highways anymore through our small bucolic villages, so we even designed our own Vermont state design standards that got away from what many of us know as the Green Book, and it matched better with our landscape. And we talk about new capacity. We an expansion. We also recognize here in Vermont and nationally that we can't just do it with building out. We need to use intelligent transportation systems. So before I jump right into just how we migrated to more money to preservation, it should be prefaced with we also recognize we got to fix the new expansion challenges with intelligence and innovation, and that's where ITS comes in, and as well as asset management. And then more recently in 2007, we were looking at our out-year budgets, and it included new capacity that remained on the book, as well as preservation, replacement of bridges, and we crafted the phrase road to affordability because it spoke to much of what you're talking about here in Vermont. We recognize with our older infrastructure, and you know what, our challenges aren't quite the same as some more populated states. We only have just over 600,000 inhabitants. We're not as densely populated, though we are a freight corridor from Quebec down to I-95. We needed to look at what we are maintaining, and we realized in the out years we couldn't afford to do both preservation as well as new capacity or expansion. So we took a stand and we said we're going to limit what we do for expansion. We can weather the storm as far as congestion because we don't have a lot of it, and we're going to migrate to new capacity. So I haven't validated your 77%, but I do know that that was our mission, and we've been doing that. Furthermore, other strategies are we worked with Congress to raise our weight limits on the interstate, and that's helped to some degree to reduce some congestion along the local highways and allow us to get by with preserving what we have on the local highways. So, looking ahead, though we've made this change, that doesn't mean that we're not always leaning forward. We may have capacity issues in Quebec. They're looking at a new corridor to tie in with I-89, which is A35. We've got to look out for that. Post-Irene, the hurricane, tropical storm, we realize our roads and rivers after 400 years of cohabitating valleys, we got to look at differently. And, our statistics might show on the way you're capturing the data that we're investing more in new roads when actually we're moving the roads away from the rivers. So, again, you got to be careful of how we look at the data. We may divest in roads. That's the next question that we need to ask. And also, how do we move people and goods safely? Maybe our rail lines is another option. But yeah, we chose to go that way because we had a wake-up call. We had to burst a bubble, and we weren't going to survive without making a change. We just couldn't afford it.
Well, Rich, it seems that the strategy and approach that you're taking in Vermont is working because between in 2008 and 2011, the overall condition of Vermont's roads has improved, which is obviously pretty good news for a lot of stakeholders. What has that meant for your agency's budget?
Yeah, our budget process is an annual one at the legislature, and we testify as stewards of the Agency of Transportation directly to the two transportation committees. Historically, there were up downs depending on changing agency priorities as well as maybe changing members on those committees. But through performance measures and asset management, which was written in the state statute in 2001. Budgets more recently, when we present it based on those clear and transparent objectives, we have very few changes, if anything at all, with our budgets. So we have strong support across the state when we develop a budget, and that's a wonderful world to be in.
That's great. Well, thanks a lot for that background, Rich. I'd just like to remind our participants, if you have any questions for our panelists, you can chat them into the window. You can either choose to direct them to a specific panelist or just to the group at large. So just a reminder there. And thanks again, Rich. So moving on, going to speak to somebody from the Michigan Department of Transportation. Joining us, we have Polly Kent, administer the Intermodal Policy Division at Michigan Department of Transportation. So first question for Polly. Asset management is one strategy that we recommend states use to keep their roads in a good state of repair. The Michigan DOT has been recognized nationally for its leading practices in asset management. So Polly, can you tell us about MDOT's asset management program and how it's impacted the spending decisions at the agency?
Thanks, Craig. I would be happy to talk about that, and thanks to all the folks who are listening and participating in this webinar today. So just Michigan's infrastructure, unlike Vermont, we don't have 400-year-old infrastructure, but as the car capital of the country, we do place a lot of value on our roads, and we have quite a few miles of road to deal with, and some of the oldest interstates in the country. So just a little smidgen of history. Back in 2000, our legislature created a special committee to examine Michigan's transportation funding needs, and MDOT was already doing asset management at that time. And the committee was so taken with the notion that they thought that we should spread this technique to the cities and counties who actually control the majority of roads in Michigan. So in 2004, they created this multi-jurisdictional Transportation Asset Management Council. And they've been in operation for 10 years, measuring the condition of Michigan's federal aid system, which is under all three jurisdictions. And this partnership has really worked out very well for all of us. I think it's engendered a spirit of cooperation among the different transportation agencies that certainly had not existed before that. And our techniques have gotten a lot more sophisticated over time. Gathering all this data allows us to make projections with models that help us make decisions about how and where to invest for the right fix at the right time. And it actually led to a conscious decision on MDOT's part in the early 2000s. Before the economic recession, Michigan's economy was sort of already struggling at that point because of the changing auto industry. So around about 2004, MDOT was starting to feel the pinch financially and made a conscious decision to really limit its expansion projects and took a number of projects off the books that had been planned for many years. And there was a great hue and cry that arose as a result, but we stuck to our guns and focused our resources on preserving the existing system. Being able to do that has really helped us. Having the data and the capacity to make those projections, we've been working now with our legislature for about 6 years trying to get them to pass a state revenue package to shore up our funding. And we have all the information, and the counties and cities are right there with us, showing them the data that the asset management effort has provided us. And there's just no arguing with the facts. There needs to be more investment, and the legislature, even the legislators, have come to the conclusion that more investment is definitely needed. It's just a question of finding that political will and figuring out where the money's to come from. But I fully expect that when we do get a revenue package, by far the majority of that money will be put toward preserving the system that we have rather than expansion. Particularly in Michigan, we were the one and only state in 2010 to lose population in the census. So while some of our aging interstates may need modernization to improve safety or alter some merge-weave patterns that were in place for decades, we don't need a lot of new highways like growing states like Florida or Arizona might.
Right. So speaking of the asset management practices in Michigan Poly, what kind of results have you seen there from that strategy?
As far as the condition of the infrastructure?
Yeah, or just the general awareness of the issue of repair versus expansion, either within the agency or within the legislature or other stakeholders too.
Oh, I think that one of the interesting things has been the increased awareness at the local level for the counties and cities as this process has continued over the last decade. And you can see from the graphs that they provide, every year they measure the condition, good, fair, poor, of the federal aid system, which is only about 10,000 miles of it is under MDOT's jurisdiction, and we have a 37,000-mile system, so the rest is under the jurisdiction of the counties and the cities. And you can see in the graphs the condition overall of the federal aid system was really falling pretty rapidly back in the mid-2000s, and there hasn't been a state or federal revenue increase in that time, but the graph has sort of tapered off now, and while those roads aren't getting better, they're not getting significantly worse anymore, and I think that that's a credit to asset management and the effort that the locals have taken to improve their asset management approaches. Does that respond to your question?
Yeah, no, that's a terrific answer. Well, thanks a lot for providing that background, Polly. It's definitely appreciated. We're going to move on to our third panelist. And joining us from Tennessee, we have Steve Allen, who's the Strategic Transportation Investments Director at the Tennessee Department of Transportation. So first question for Steve is, Tennessee is actually, the roads are in good condition, and given the state's population and economy are growing, you're making strategic investments in additional capacity. So do you have a new program in place called Expedited Project Delivery? And could you tell us a little bit more about that project and what you hope to achieve there?
Yes, thank you for inviting Tennessee to participate today. And we are very proud of our system. We're ranked number 2 in the nation in the quality of our roads. And we're also just one of 4 states with no transportation debt. So we consider ourselves number 1. We're in the midst of our 3-year program, and we're doing a prioritization of those funds. And Commissioner Schroer recognized that we did not have a good system in place to actually look at all of our project commitments. And so we've actually gone down that road, and I'm going to get into that a little bit more. He also, even though I've been with the department for 37 years, he recognized we did need to look at all of our investments. And so we actually just created my division December of last year, and therefore the Strategic Transportation Investments Division is relatively new. But our focus is on project prioritization, expedited project delivery, economic development types projects to make sure we are spending our money in the right places. And the first thing that we do is we budget our recurring costs first. Again, I've been with the department a long time. We used to actually fund projects first, and what was left over would be what we would actually spend on our recurring cost. But under Paul Deggs, our Deputy Commissioner and Chief Engineer, recognizes that maintaining the system is paramount for us to move forward. It goes back to what you said, that ounce of prevention goes a long way. So we're able to actually move that money first. We say that money is not going to be available to be spent on projects. So we allocate the funds for our resurfacing program. We have a very good asset management program to look at our resurfacing needs and put those on a proper schedule. It's wise to actually look at what needs to be done. You don't want to pave a road every 2 or 3 years just to make it ride better. You have to do that and manage, on a cycle. What is the best cycle? How are they holding up? And again, one of the states talked about we're not all created equal. We have different weather conditions. So you need to have a really good system to look at that. Our bridge repair program, we have a very robust inventory, so we know those bridges. You wouldn't necessarily want all your bridges to be 100% perfect all the time. You need to actually have a way to actually budget those year to year, so we're able to do that. And then we fund all of our other programs. And then we got into where are we today with all of our projects, and we actually came up with this program called Expedited Project Delivery. At first we were talking about right sizing and downsizing, and that's not really what we were looking at doing. So our Chief of Staff, Lindsay Botts, actually came up with Expedited Project Delivery because what we're trying to do is deliver a project in a timely manner. Because what had happened over the years, we'd actually have a lot of projects that were already on the books that were, for instance, most people have an existing 2-lane roadway. They said, we'd like to have a 4-lane roadway. So what we studied was a 4-lane roadway. And so we got into the situation where we had an $8 billion worth of backlog of existing projects. Impossible to fund those with the amount of funds that we get on an annual basis. So the EPD program idea is to go out and actually analyze those existing conditions and determine what are the immediate concerns. And when we do those, we look at first safety, then we look at the congestion, and then we look at the economic development potential. And we take all that into account, and I'll give you some examples. Bypasses used to be the in vogue things to do. They're not actually the best solution anymore. And so a lot of times we'll not do a bypass project and go back and look at that existing route. What can be done to that existing route to actually make it function the way that it was intended? Or take that bypass project, instead of building a 4-lane, just build a 2-lane on 4-lane right away until the time comes that the 4-lane is actually justified. We also look at revisiting our typical sections on those projects. Was a 4-lane divided roadway really the best solution? Can you live with a 3-lane or a 5-lane section? We also looked at the TSM, your Transportation System Management options. And that was actually one of the things I think goes a long way to look at a bypass project. We were actually able to look at the existing system and do some intersection improvements, do a signal system upgrade, and got 90% of the capacity improvement through a much smaller project than a bypass project. But we also think that operations is very important. You know, we have a good ITS system here in Tennessee. We also have the HELP program, because it doesn't matter what condition your roadways are in if you can't actually operate on them due to incidences. So that's an area that we really try to address, and that takes care of really congestion and safety at the same time.
That's great, Steve. I know many people in our audience today are definitely encouraged to hear about the approach that you're taking, your agency's taking in Tennessee, and really a strategic look at road projects. It's definitely refreshing to hear. And if anybody on the line has questions for Steve, feel free to chat them in or use the hashtag #RepairPriorities on Twitter. I guess, Steve, one last question for you. TDOT is definitely focused on maintaining its roads in a state of good repair, as you just mentioned, while exploring strategic expansion projects. How is that strategy paying off for Tennessee taxpayers, and what has been the feedback from municipalities and residents?
Well, we've just completed our second customer survey, and overall the public is very impressed and pleased with the condition of our roadways. But one thing that we are seeing, and it was the same as it was in the previous survey, is drivers and older drivers, and I am an older driver, would like to see better pavement markings, better visibility, and things of that nature. So we're actually trying to look at that, and that's a really good expenditure of your funds also. We're not just talking about, we're talking about good repairs, and just not the condition of the pavement itself. It's all those things that makes it better for the driving public. So that's the other area that we're really addressing right now. And we've actually been able to spend some of our safety dollars on our resurfacing projects. While you're doing the resurfacing project, go ahead and make your safety improvements at the same time with those pavement markings and guardrail and signage. And that's been a big success for us, and we get a lot of positive feedback. Great.
Well, thanks a lot to Steve and all of our panelists. And at this time, we're going to field some of the questions that have come in via the webinar and via Twitter. So thanks a lot, and keep them coming, as we still have some time on this call to get to some questions. So the first one we're going to take is going to be for Rich in Vermont. And this question comes from Adam Maynard, who's participating on the webinar. And the question is, how does climate change and extreme weather in particular factor into projections for road condition and necessary repairs? And he mentions specifically the flooding that washed out roads and bridges across Vermont, especially during Hurricane Irene, which was really major for the state. How do you account for this risk in your decision making in Vermont?
Well, post-Irene, we worked hand in hand with our river engineers out at the Agency of Natural Resources, and we're actually rewriting our hydraulic manual, and it has not so much to do with some statistical knowledge that we have on the rain amounts are going to be this much greater in the future. It has more to do how we, as I mentioned, share the valleys, the river valleys, along with our highway system. So it's to build in the capacity for those future higher events, and also the rivers have been changing for millennium, so we've got to play better in the river valleys. And ironically, I've got a newscast to join in with in about a week where they're asking about potholes, and are we going to see more potholes because of the more severe weather and the frost depths? And who's to say, but certainly our strategies and innovations to deal with whatever changes may be coming our way are on our resiliency radar, so to speak, and we're always looking for ways to accommodate whatever changes come our way more readily, either through the materials, the designs, and the planning.
That's great. If anybody else wants to mention, in Tennessee or Michigan, how you account for, the risk of extreme weather, feel free to answer as well.
This is Polly in Michigan, and I would like to chime in just briefly to mention that in Michigan, we're working with FHWA to do a climate vulnerability study to identify a climate model that can be used to predict what shifting weather patterns we're likely to see. And in Michigan, that will probably be more frequent and severe storms, so therefore the flooding and so forth that folks have mentioned. And once we've identified the model, we can look at the various parts of Michigan and identify those assets that might be most vulnerable to washout, or types of assets like bridges. And so that study is underway here now.
Very cool. Okay, so we're going to take another question. Jim is participating on our webinar and has a question about how agencies take inventory of all the potholes that are out on their roads, specifically about crowdsourcing the inventory of potholes with cell phones and photos and GPS and even social media. That's something that happens here in D.C. They call it Pothole Palooza, where you're encouraged to go out and take a picture of potholes and where it is, and the agency goes out and repairs it. Do any of your agencies have experience with this in terms of, getting the general public out there invested in where the repair needs are?
This is Steve in Tennessee. Of course, we get plenty of complaints coming through with our comment line. But we're very proactive. We have district offices across the state, and they travel. And we prioritize. First system we look at is our interstate system, then our major state route systems next. And we're just proactive, and we try to do those as quickly as possible with a quick patch, and then go back and fix it later when the weather is actually cohesive to do that.
Cool. All right, we have another question from a webinar participant, Rob Dayton. He asks, what type of public messaging, public outreach have either Public Works or DOT leaders been doing to get the message out to taxpayers of the extreme infrastructure maintenance funding needs? So obviously this is a big issue. What's being done on your level to kind of get the word out on this?
Well, in Michigan, we're trying to use more social media for sure. Facebook page. We're working closely with the industry, transportation and construction industry, and they have a web page and encourage their members to be vocal about this, letters to the editor, editorial boards, etc. I just saw a great letter to the editor in our Lansing State Journal today that was unsolicited from a professor at Michigan State University who was recruiting grad students, and his car hit a giant pothole, and at $1,500, and about 5 hours later, they were towed away from but didn't make much of an impression on the graduate student recruits. So he wrote quite a nice letter to the State Journal, and I'm hoping for more of that public response, because that really is critical in convincing the legislators that the time for action has come.
Great.
In Tennessee, Commissioner Schroer has actually gone statewide. We went on a statewide summit tour this last year to talk to our local officials and our state representatives and others in the metropolitan planning organizations and our rural planning organizations. And we've actually told these stories about the conditions of our roads, the state of where we are in our budget, and we're very concerned about what's going to happen federally with our funding dollars, because everybody knows what those are, and we're very concerned that if we don't do something about the funding, that we will be in a position to only look at our recurring costs and only be able to address those, and infrastructure, in particular our roadways, is the backbone of your economic development and your potential to actually keep this country moving forward. So we're very concerned about where we are nationally.
Great. Well, thanks a lot for your answers. We have another question here from Jim Bacon, Jim Bacon is a Virginia-based writer and blogger. He has a question for all the speakers, but Rich, I think you mentioned something about this in your remarks. He asks, is anyone looking at divesting roads, actually shrinking the road network in areas that are losing population, but that might also mean, converting paved roads into gravel or what have you. Rich, do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, excuse me, sure. I did bring it up. It's something that we've been talking about. Post-Irene, the biggest opportunity came when FEMA came to town on the local roads, and they have the program where, a bridge is washed out, we'll give you up to 50% replacement costs if you just leave the bridge out of it and divest from the road. And I think some towns were looking at that and used other ways to either get around the river through another route and let up the road on the other side of the bridge that was washed out and divest, or just let go of that road altogether. So that's one strategy that came to bear or fruit in post-Irene. And then, sometimes we have local communities, and I noticed the data for Vermont where we had lane miles reduced. Sometimes local communities will take over some segments of state highway, and they actually play a role in more efficiently managing that segment of state highway through their village on their own amongst their own municipal roads. And then also we do want to look at what opportunities we have in Vermont to divest from lanes or any type of other asset that we currently maintain that might not meet the objectives of our strategic plan any longer.
And I guess this kind of question came in as well. How do you measure the impacts on residents and businesses in some of those situations?
Yeah, the situations on the local roads, you're talking one or two dwellings, if any, on the back roads of Vermont. And then we don't necessarily have a model yet set up for the state system.
This is Polly from Michigan, and I'd just like to speak to that question too. There's sort of several different ways that we're kind of divesting from roads or lanes. At the county road level, for several years, they've been turning some miles of county roads back to gravel, and those are lowly traveled roads. At the state level, we currently lead the nation in the number of road diets, 4 to 3 lane conversions with bikeways, and that's sort of the upside of a down economy. Our congestion has fallen off as the economy deteriorated, and the advantage was that we were then able to create these bikeways from the 4 to 3 lane conversions, and that's a bonus, I think, for the folks that live along those routes. And lastly, in Detroit, there are some folks who are looking at converting I-375 to a boulevard from an interstate. And while nothing's been decided about that yet, that's another way of divesting a highway that could have some distinct advantages.
That's cool. Polly, I have another follow-up question for you there. In Michigan, obviously known for some pretty extreme weather, especially in the wintertime. How has that impacted maybe over time or, maybe more immediately the broader efforts to repair roads in Michigan?
Well, we actually Michigan is such a large state, and the Upper Peninsula weather pattern I don't think has changed as much this year as the Lower Peninsula. The last few years in the Lower Peninsula, we have had fairly mild winters, and this winter has been a real reminder of what it can be. And I think that's just how we roll in Michigan. I mean, we always have weather, we always have potholes, and it's just a thing we have to do every year. It doesn't seem fair that they don't have to do this in warmer, drier places, but that's just, they don't have to buy coats and boots in Arizona either, I guess. So that's how it is.
Looks like we have one more question coming in here. This is from Matt Mann, participating on the webinar. He says that truck freight takes a huge toll on the road infrastructure, and what avenues have your agencies considered to streamline truck traffic or improving the rail network even to move goods and take trucks off the road? If anybody wants to speak to that, please jump in.
Sure, this is Rich, and I don't know if that's the Matt Mann that I know from Vermont or not, but I spoke earlier about some of the strategies here in Vermont. We worked with Congress. We were an island when it came to moving freight through the region on the highways or any type of truck traffic, and we were forced to get off the interstates when coming in and then going into the state highways and U.S. routes through villages, and we were successful in raising our rates to be more harmonious with the Quebec and surrounding states. So it's maybe certainly potentially reduced the number of truck trips because the trucks can carry more and don't have to make as many trips. And the safety we've recognized through other studies is improved, and the degradation because of the good designs of interstates is actually reducing our overhead is what we're forecasting. So all good things on truck traffic, I think, in Vermont in recent years. And then Vermont's rather unique. The railroads started divesting from Vermont up to 50 years ago, and rather than let those railroads go defunct or rail banked, Vermont State actually bought the rail lines, a number of them, and we own and maintain them and have an agreement with an operator. And though it is a struggle to find the revenues to maintain those assets, I think it's critically important as we look to the future, we all do, that if we let those go and freight traffic increases, we're going to need those rail lines. So let's keep them up and operational so we don't have to invest so much in the future.
All right. If anybody else wants to chime in. All right. Well, with that, I think we're ready to conclude today's call. So I'd really like to thank all of our panelists and all the listeners who asked questions and participated. You can find more information about this report, Repair Priorities 2014, on our website at smartgrowthamerica.org/repair-priorities. And a recording of this call will be made available on our website, as well as the slides. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. You can email me directly at cchester@smartgrowthamerica.org, and we can direct you to the right place. So thanks a lot. Enjoy the report, and keep in touch.